Okay, did the screen share?
It did, yes. Thank you, Melissa. Great. Welcome, everyone, to the resumption of our regional plan snapshot series for the update to the regional plan for 2045. We did 12 of these snapshots in the fall of 2021, and now we are resuming these. This is the first of our next set of 12 snapshots called our Ecosystem 101. Today, we'll be covering the topics of watershed, hydrology, and geology, so the physical aspects of our natural environment. And with us today are Kelly Bingham and John Carr from the county, as well as Aaron Young to answer questions later in the meeting. Ed Schenk, Doug Slover, and Matt Storosh from the city and the county, respectively, our stormwater divisions, have also contributed to today's presentation. Melissa, next slide. So this regional snapshot series occurs most Mondays at noon. You have to visit our website and you can pre-register for these. The format is always a 15-minute presentation with 15 minutes for Q&A. All of these recordings are posted to the City of Flagstaff's YouTube channel, and there's a playlist there where you can watch them back to back if you'd like. All of these snapshots are accompanied by a paper that we are producing kind of in the month or two that follow, and they're all drafts. We're giving the best information we have right now and sharing what we know with you and with the general public in both the city and county. And we're definitely open to feedback or other information. If you see something and you think, I know something about that, please get in touch with us and let us know. Our next webinar, which will be a week from today, Monday, January 31st at noon, will be on flooding, fire, and emergency management, and it will build on the topics that we are discussing today. So with that, I'll hand it over to John Carr, who will discuss watersheds and our natural ecosystems. Take it away, John.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about hydrology and watersheds. And I think everybody's probably, especially this audience of distinguished people in this background, is familiar with the water cycle or the hydrologic cycle with evaporation, precipitation. And I can't show my cursor here. I was planning on showing my cursor, but all of these processes here can be considered hydrology. And so what we're going to be talking about today is just one component of them, which is the runoff portion, which is surface water hydrology. There's also the components of percolation, infiltration, and that's groundwater hydrology. So today we're going to be looking at surface water hydrology in the context of watersheds. Next slide, please. So here's just a definition of it. Hydrology is the study of the distribution of movement of water, as it shows on that previous slide. So let's take a look at watersheds. Next slide, please. So here is a watershed. So no matter where you're standing on the earth, you're on a watershed. Even if you're in a desert and it doesn't look like it's rained or maybe never has rained, you're in a watershed. Now here, you can tell it's rained because it's a dry lake bed. And yes, this is a non-copyrighted photo, Sarah, in case you're wondering. I got this from the Death Valley National Park. So, and a watershed is formed because anytime you're going to have topographic differences, water is going to collect at a certain point. So that helps us define what a watershed is. Next slide, please. So just to make the simplest possible explanation that I could come up with, and I actually didn't come up with this is one that I found online, USGS site, and it's a swimming pool with a cover on it. So any drop of water that falls on that covering of the pool will end up in that swimming pool. So that's our watershed in this context. In this setting, there's not an outlet. It's just going to evaporate or potentially leak through the bottom of that in some places. But in a lot of watersheds, there is a final outfall. And we'll go to the next slide and continue that, please. So here is, I went to the United States Geological Association has broken up the United States into these watersheds. And they have, you see the abbreviation HU, and that's hydraulic unit. And the largest one is, which is, you see the 21 that are on the continental United States. Those are represented by the 2-unit HUC, hydraulic unit code. And that represents the largest watershed. As you break it down, it goes to a 4-digit watershed, and then a 6. It just keeps breaking it down all the way down to where you get to the smallest that the USGS breaks it down, which is a 12-unit hydrologic unit. And each of these numbers represents the steps you should go through. So like in this area up in California, it's 18. You'll see 18 follows for each one of the subsequent numbers. This is from the USGS site. And I've shown here in the lower left, the lower Colorado River. And it is in region number 15. Next slide, please. And then as you break it down into the subsequent slides, there's all the watersheds from the little Colorado River watershed. And then I'm going to go to the next slide, which is to that basin. So there's the next basin of the little Colorado River. And it probably been good to have aerial in the background. I wasn't able to get that on this slide. Let's go to the next slide, please. And then it breaks it down to the largest, they call it a sub-basin at this point, which is the Canyon Diablo. Each one of these, and I'm going to provide some websites at the end of the presentation that you can find. You can map your watershed. You can find out what the area of any of these particular watersheds are, where they drain to. And I'll get to that in a couple slides down. Next slide, please. And for example, this is the Canyon Diablo watershed. You see Flagstaff up there in the kind of the upper left. And it does actually break down even further than this. And that is available in a Google Earth webpage, which breaks down these basins. Next slide, please. And what are the advantages of a healthy water system? I mean, why are watersheds important to us? Where there's ecosystem benefits, economic benefits, and physical and mental health benefits. So the ecosystem benefits are in the improved water quality, as you can see there. Under economic benefits, reduced drinking water treatment due to reduced infrastructure costs, and thereby increasing property values. Physical and mental health benefits, there's been studies that show that people that are close to recreational areas are more likely to exercise and therefore be in better shape and overall we have a community with lower health costs. Next slide, please. And then this slide talks about the types of drainages. In our area southwest, there is the perennial, intermittent, and ephemeral streams. So the ephemeral stream responds to rainfall and snow melt generally, and that's probably encompasses 80 to 90% of the streams you see in our region. And their intermittent stream is one that responds to that has runoff 30 days in a row. And there are various definitions. The Arizona Department of Environmental Quality has definitions for it. And that's generally what we go by when we look at on-site wastewater treatment systems in terms of setback requirements. And then there's the perennial stream, which ADEQ defines the Rio de Flag as a perennial stream. And that is when water's, by definition, water's flowing all the time. And as most of us know that live here, the Rio does not flow continually. However, that it is considered a perennial stream. Let's go to the next slide, please. And here's some web pages. And I don't know if, Melissa, can you click on like that top one and share your screen? Here's my waterway, and then just click in Flagstaff, Arizona. Put me on the spot.
You
here.
did that display?
Yeah, under the search by address, just type Flagstaff, Arizona. There you go. And so it's pulled up that address. It looks like it's pulled up the City Hall address, and it's automatically generated a watershed that's anything that falls within the perimeter of that polygon ultimately is collected, and it's not showing where the outfall is. But let's go back to that slide we had there. I'll show you a couple more. Now go to runoff tracer, that second web page. There we go. And go to map. And if you want to zoom into Flagstaff. And then if you click on any one of those, like the Rural Colorado River,
Did I go too far?
Yep. Nope, just a little bit, or any of those washes. You click on any of those washes. And what it does is it traces where the runoff goes from that point. So that all of these in the Little Colorado River watershed will collect and go down to the Gulf of Mexico. Let me go back to the, this is one more slide I want to show you is locate your watershed. And so if you click on Little Colorado River, and this is kind of what I went through there, it breaks it down by each watershed as you continually go. And then if you click in there, there you go, 1502. And as you go through there, there's just a lot of information there on these watersheds. And then when you get to the final extent, there we go. And then if you want to click on additional information, go back one. And then it says additional information for this watershed in blue text below. There you go. And then it just has a lot more information about the watershed. Probably more than we have time to discuss at this meeting. One more thing I want to show you there on that slide. If you go to, actually, I missed one, stream stats. That one's really useful. And here you can just click X there under stream stats. And then in the search bar on the left there, just click Arizona or type Arizona. Oops. Well, I don't want to take up too much time. Jump into.
Sorry, it seems to have not been.
But this has this one has the ability to you can trace a runoff. You can take a drop of water. There you go. Okay, so then click on Arizona on the far left. There's those three choices there. There you go. Okay. And so what this does is it allows you to delineate a watershed. So you have to zoom in real tight and go and zoom in Flagstaff. You should use your, I should have probably told you I was going to do this, Melissa. I'm sorry.
That's right.
If you zoom in even tighter, there you go. Ultimately, until you start seeing and just a little bit more, and you'll start to see little blue lines. Okay.
Right here.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite. There you go. Okay, now click on one of them right there. So then it's starting to delineate your watershed. And what it's doing is taking USGS. Try one more time. See on the left, far left, it says delineate. Click on that. Okay, then now go back and get as close as you can to that stream. There you go. Now it's determining if it can figure out what the area is. So now it's delineating the basin, and what it'll do is generate a shape file. It'll generate a KML file if you want, whichever one you prefer, and it provides information such as the longest route to that drainage point. So it's going to There you go. So that's established your watershed. And then if you go on the left there, where it says continue. All right, and then it'll allow you to find out a lot more parameters on that. So if you pick on basin characteristics, there you go. And then you see you can find out any of those parameters. There's the perimeter of it, mean, basin, slope. And what I usually go to, scroll down just a little bit more, Melissa. Okay, where it says CONDA, that one there, contributing area to the watershed. That's one that's really useful. But as you can see, there's a lot of information here. So, and then scroll down, and then it will generate, hit continue. And then it'll calculate that. We won't wait for it to go through all of that, but just to give you a general gist. If you want to go back to that last slide, Melissa, and then the last one is there's Google Earth watershed files. And for those of you that like to use Google Earth, this is a really good site. You just download that KML or KMZ file up there, and then it'll save it to your download folder and open Google Earth. And you don't have to go through that, but there's a lot of information there. So I think at this point, I will turn the slide over to Kelly and let her follow up with her discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. So geology is the study of the earth, the materials it's made of, and the processes that act on them. It is deeply connected to hydrology, which John was just talking about. But before I get into that, I wanted to give a quick background on the types of rocks that we can find in the Flagstaff region. In this area, we see mostly sedimentary or layer cake formations where the rocks are stacked on top of each other in layers. On top, we can see Mullenkopee, and this is something that maybe you've seen driving on Route 66 or visiting the Grand Canyon. Below that is Kaibab limestone, which you can see in the continental area or the pit climbing area. And you may actually recognize the photo in the presentation from the Grand Canyon as well. Below that is Coconino sandstone. And at the bottom, we'll find Supai, which gives Sedona its iconic red color. And then randomly throughout this landscape, you can see volcanic or igneous rock formations, and those form on top of the sedimentary rocks. Some examples of this are Sunset Crater and Mount Eldon, which you can see pictures of on the left. And next slide, please, Melissa. All right, and very quickly, we'll go a little bit into the volcanic activity that we see in this region. Volcanic activity occurs when materials or gases from below the surface of the earth are released to the surface. And this can happen in many different ways. For example, in the pictures here, you can see Sugarloaf on the bottom left. And this is much lighter in color than Sunset Crater, which is on the top right. And this is just due to different temperatures and different materials that are in the rock when the magma comes out of the earth. So these are just a variety of images that show you some of the things that we see in our region. Next slide, please. And in this region, tectonic events have also shaped our topography. And this occurs when two pieces of the earth collide or slide against each other, and it creates cracks and fissures. Next slide, please. All right, so these cracks and fissures have formed a pattern that dominates our drainages, which just means that this is often where we see water accumulate. In fact, all of the inner city well fields are located in fault zones. This map is a little small, but it shows where well fields are located in relation to our topography. Next slide. Another influence on our water is karst. Karst landscape forms when water falls into existing cracks and fissures in a soluble rocks. In this case, that rock is Kaibab limestone. The rock eventually erodes or is dissolved by the water, which can create sinkholes, disappearing streams, and complex underground drainage systems. And that's actually why Lower Lake Mary holds water less easily than Upper Lake Mary. And you can see in the diagram here that the water can just kind of fall or disappear It doesn't seem like the water is flowing anywhere. It's just flowing down into the earth. And then the next slide. We had a video of this. Maybe if we have time, Melissa can pull it up. For now, do you want to continue moving on?
Let's try to move through, and then if there's time, we can play the video. We can try to do that, Kelly.
Perfect. Thanks, Melissa. All right, so we'll move on to the next slide. So we've looked at how geology can impact our water, and you might have seen some areas that you use for recreation. And one final way that we interact with geology in this region is through mining. In our area, we mine for cinder, aggregate, and crushed stone. And this is actually a picture from the Arizona Geological Survey Active Mines Map. This is actually brand new and is a resource you can find online by searching for it. And you can kind of poke around and see what mines are in our area. It has a little bit more detail that you can explore on your own. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, I wanted to leave you with a few questions. One, how does geology affect your life in the Flagstaff region? Did you recognize any areas that you might have driven past or visited for recreation? Many of our most famous geological features, like the San Francisco Peaks, Mount Eldon, Meteor Crater, or the Grand Canyon, create a strong sense of place and generate tourism. And our built environment is really just a response to these existing features. So thank you for your time. We hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we can move on to the questions.
Great. Thank you, Kelly and John. I know there's a question in the chat. I need to scroll up, but I'll take, this is probably a question for John and Ed about stream beds from Nat. He said he explores stream beds and finds that some are disrupted by land ownership changes. And the Rio to Flag is a good example past the Townsend-Winona Road. So he wants to know a little more about ownership and the impact of ownership on managing stream beds.
Okay, I could take a shot at that. Ed probably has some comments on it as well. Though there's several implications to this question. If the disruption is in a FEMA special flood hazard area, and I don't know if it is or not, or if it's in the county or the city's floodplain, then a floodplain permit should have been involved. They should have secured that first. If it was in a floodway, that's even a bigger problem because there's a no rise requirement. There's a potential that it was in the waters of the United States where the Army Corps of Engineers should have been involved. There was, and then that determination should have been done before they did any disturbing in the wash or the stream. Now, not knowing where it is, I'm just kind of making a broad brush look at this. The other one that comes to mind is anything that you do that impacts downstream property owners vis-a-vis a negative and adverse impact could be a problem as well. Ed, I don't know if you have any other things you want to comment on that?
No, John, I think you kind of took care of most of the potential issues there. So this is Ed Schenk, stormwater manager from the city. The question was from near Townsend, Winona, which would definitely be on the county side of things. But the county and the city have pretty similar regulations, but mostly follow the FEMA regulations for floodplains and floodways. So I think John kind of covered most of it.
Well, and Ed, let me add a question to that. Most of the floodplains in our county were established in the 1970s and 80s, correct? Is that about the time frame where those formal Federal Emergency Management Agency floodplains were established?
So FEMA floodplain designation, just to be clear here, it's not based on ecology, or it looks like Christopher has his hand up. I'll let him jump in a second. But FEMA floodplains is not really based on ecology or even really hydrology to a certain degree. It's a FEMA regulated overlay based on national flood insurance policies, NFIP. So this is truly for flood insurance purposes. So it's trying to keep people from having repetitive losses due to floods. With that, I'll turn it over to Christopher or John.
I was just going to add also that FEMA floodplains there are floodplains all over the county, but there's only FEMA floodplains in places where there's been development, where there's been funding to do those types of studies. And you'll see a lot of areas where what's the difference between this looks like a floodplain and it's not a FEMA floodplain. Well, it is a floodplain. It's just not managed by FEMA and it doesn't have those insurance implications. Sorry, Christopher, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, thanks, John and Ed. So I'm Christopher Tressler. I serve as the county engineer and the engineer for the flood control district. And to Sarah's question, that there was quite a bit of an effort undertaking mapping of floodplains and to different degrees of specificity and or the resolution of the boundaries of floodplains. And as development warrants and as flooding or other natural disasters happen, there's a need to further refine those studies and develop a more of a refined delineation of floodplains. I mean, nobody wants to live in a floodplain, and we do. There is a desire to maximize the amount of developable land to a certain degree, and so studies happen all the time. The county undertook one in the Mountain Dell area recently to help more accurately define the floodplain, and we've done similar work in Munns Park and other places. And so it's they're defined to a certain degree throughout the state and the county, but they're definitely refined as time goes by.
I think that's a really good point, Chris. I mean, we're talking about the ecosystems today a little bit, but there's always a human framework that we're using to manage and think and talk about those systems. And they aren't apples and oranges, but they aren't always 100% overlap for both. So while we care about the hydrology of the entire watershed, there are parts that are managed in a certain way. And so I think that these answers are helpful in that area. And then I see that Sat had a question in the chat with me. Maybe Aaron and Ed can answer that of how are we monitoring the watershed that feeds our wells? And if we have the results. So Sat, do you mean, are we monitoring the surface waters or are we monitoring what ends up in the well? Maybe that'll help. And maybe Aaron and Ed from the city can hop in on that.
The question is really overall health of our water system is a lot based on the watershed. So yeah, all of the above. I'm certainly seeing the tree line move uphill. The dead trees out on 89 by Wapatki, and the dead trees by the casino out east of town. Seems like we're getting less water in the last 20 years. I would assume, I don't know if we're mining ancient water, if we're counting on water coming out of the sky to refill these aquifers. Just how's the health of the whole system? Are we monitoring it, and can we make any conclusions?
Ed, should I start with that?
Yeah, Aaron, I think that's, I mean, I know the answers, but that's more in your wheelhouse, so I'll let you run with it.
Well, maybe, if I don't touch on something, Ed, you can chime in. But Sat, you've raised kind of a number of issues that are pretty broad, from purely watershed health and sort of monitoring water quality of stormwater to accounting for the age of the aquifer and recharge rates to the aquifer. So you've touched on a number of things that making the question kind of tricky to answer, but just in general, we do kind of have an idea on the age of water in the various aquifers, the R aquifer, the C aquifer, the shallow aquifers that like Baderville, those people pull from. So that's just a groundwater balance. That's a pretty tricky question to answer. So we could talk about that at another time. In terms of water quality and the health of the C aquifer that we pull from, our wells are anywhere from 800 feet to 2,500 feet deep. So a lot of our water comes from 2,000 feet deep. We do have to sample water quality under the federal guidelines for traces of contaminants from stormwater runoff. And so, yes, the quick answer is yes, we sort of monitor for a lot of these things that you're talking about. And somebody just put a link to our annual report to the Water Commission, where we do have a lot of this kind of data. But to talk about it in more detail would probably be like another talk. So I'll leave it there. If Ed wants to chime in, he's welcome to.
Can you tell me if we're seeing any lowering of water levels in our city wells?
Yes, we do, especially in the region around Lower Lake Mary. We have a well field in that area. It was drilled in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and the water table is dropping 10 feet per year. The water table, though, is Lake Mary and Upper Lake Mary in the Walnut Creek area. They're ephemeral. There's no groundwater, at least in the past pre-development of our wells. Groundwater was not feeding an intermittent or perennial stream there. It was, if that was occurring, it was pre-development when the aquifer levels were higher. That's where we see about 10 feet of drawdown a year. But our other wells in the Woody Mountain well field and our what we call our inner city wells, we see maybe a foot of drawdown a year. Some wells actually are coming up. And all that data is in that report to the Water Commission.
Thank you.
I think we're at time. So I know that this is a very big topic, and I just want to remind everyone that it's sort of going to keep being woven into a couple of these snapshots. What's going on with watersheds is going to be part of talking about flooding, fire, and emergency management next week and the week after that. It'll also be part of the talk that we will have in March on utilities and how utilities are provided throughout the city and the county within our region. And so this is just a primer conversation for a lot of detailed information. And I know we put a bunch of links in the chat, and I'm going to make sure all those links also end up on the YouTube page so that if you want to go back and find them, they will be there, and that people can find the water report and all the other pieces. There's so much data about what's going on in hydrology and geology in our region that you should feel free to follow up with us. And I want to thank all the experts who joined us today. And that will be it for our recorded webinar. So Melissa's going to stop recording,